For 1,000 years, it was Europe's most powerful and confusing political experiment. Neither holy, nor Roman, nor truly an empire, the Holy Roman Empire defied labels until Napoleon wiped it off the map. How did this fractured kingdom last so long? Why did emperors battle popes? And why did Voltaire mock it? This is the true story behind Europe's most misunderstood realm, the rise of the Ottonian dynasty. In the early 10th century, the once mighty Carolingian Empire was shattered, and from its remnants, a new power began to emerge in East Francia. As the last Carolingian king, Louis the Child, died without an heir in 911, the kingdom did not turn to the west for guidance. Instead, the nobles of East Francia elected Conrad of Franconia, marking the start of an era of fragmentation and intrigue. But as the kingdom teetered on the brink of chaos, the storm was stilled by Henry the Fowler of Saxony, who rose to power in 919. With a series of cunning alliances, battles, and calculated victories, most notably against the fearsome Magyars at Riyadh in 933, he solidified his reign. However, it was his son Otto, crowned in 936, who would seal the fate of the kingdom. Though plagued by familial strife and opposition from rival dukes, Otto's iron will and deft maneuvering transformed East Francia into a kingdom where his family, the Ottonians, would dominate for the next century, laying the foundation for what would later become the Holy Roman Empire. The birth of an empire. In the heart of the 10th century, Otto the Great's decisive actions set the stage for a monumental shift in Europe's power structure. In 951, he came to the aid of Queen Adelaide of Italy, defeating her enemies, marrying her, and establishing his dominion over Italy. The following year, his victory at Lechfeld over the Magyar invaders solidified his standing. But it was in 962, when Otto was crowned emperor by Pope John XII, that the Holy Roman Empire was truly born. This act tied the German kingdom to the ancient legacy of Charlemagne, and through the concept of translatio imperii, Otto and his successors saw themselves as heirs to the Roman Empire. With this coronation came not only political power but the intertwining of the empire with the papacy, forever altering the course of history. Otto's reign was marked by profound cultural achievements, the Ottonian Renaissance, and the creation of a church system that provided stability for centuries to come. Yet, even as the empire's power grew, Otto's death in 973 left a fragile legacy, one that would be tested by regencies, foreign conflicts, and power struggles. The empire would evolve over time, forming the kingdoms of Germany, Italy, Bohemia, and Burgundy, a vast dominion held together by the threads of religion, politics, and family ties. The clash of thrones and altars. In the tumultuous 11th century, the struggle for control between the church and the empire erupted in the investiture controversy, a battle that would redefine the relationship between secular and religious powers. Pope Gregory VII, armed with reformist zeal, sought to curb the influence of kings over ecclesiastical appointments, believing that the church should remain free from political manipulation. This clash with King Henry IV, who saw himself as the divine ruler of Christendom, ignited an intense conflict. Henry's defiance led to his excommunication and a dramatic walk to Canossa in 1077, where, humbled and desperate, he begged for the Pope's forgiveness. Yet, the emperor was not easily broken. His victory over his rival, Rudolph of Swabia, didn't end the turmoil. The rebellions continued, with Henry's own sons turning against him. Only after his death did his son, Henry V, reach a resolution with the church in the 1122 Concordat of Worms. While the empire retained its power, the scars of the conflict remained. The papacy had emerged as a formidable political force, and the divine right of kings had been irrevocably challenged, leaving the once sacred nature of royal authority in tatters. The eastward march, a kingdom's reach expands. Amidst the tension of dynastic struggles and shifting political alliances, the Holy Roman Empire, now under the rule of the Hohenstaufen dynasty, found its power stretching beyond the familiar borders of Central Europe. As the 12th century unfolded, the empire embraced a transformative shift in both governance and territorial reach. Under the strategic leadership of Frederick Barbarossa, the empire sought to reassert its Roman heritage, grounding imperial rights in ancient Roman law and expanding its authority in Italy, where tensions with the papacy and city-states raged. Yet, as the empire struggled with internal conflict, the East beckoned. The Ostsiedlung movement saw German-speaking settlers, driven by both opportunity and imperial directive, push eastward into sparsely populated lands, bringing new cities, communities, and economic power to places like Silesia and Pomerania. While these settlers brought prosperity, they also left a legacy of cultural change, where Slavic traditions blended with Germanic influence. The arrival of the Teutonic Knights in Prussia marked a particularly significant moment, as their monastic state forged a path of religious and territorial expansion. Though the lands they conquered would never become part of the empire itself, their role in shaping the region's future was undeniable, marking a chapter in the Holy Roman Empire's grand, often turbulent, expansion eastward. Frederick II, the height of glory and the seeds of decline. At the zenith of his power, Frederick II's reign marked an era of extraordinary ambition and achievement. The son of Henry VI, Frederick inherited an empire vast in territory and influence, extending from Germany to Sicily, Bohemia, and Poland, with distant lands such as Cyprus and Armenia paying tribute. His marriage to Constance of Sicily had united the Norman kingdom with the Holy Roman Empire, strengthening his rule over both realms. But as the most powerful monarch in Europe since Charlemagne, his ambitions sparked fear and resistance. Frederick's political maneuvering led him to break alliances and blackmail kings, and despite the papacy's efforts to curb his power, his influence only grew. But his efforts to centralize power met resistance, particularly from the German princes, leading to tensions with the Pope. His excommunication by Pope Innocent III did little to deter him, as he famously led the Sixth Crusade, though it was a diplomatic victory rather than a military one. Despite his many successes, Frederick's rule marked the beginning of a shift in the empire's structure. His focus on Italy and the south, along with his growing reliance on the secular and ecclesiastical princes, gradually weakened central authority in Germany. His legal reforms, like the Statutum in Favorum Principum, granted immense autonomy to the German princes, laying the groundwork for the territorial fragmentation that would define the empire in the centuries to come. While Frederick's power remained formidable, the empire he once ruled with such force was destined to become a mosaic of competing princely states, setting the stage for the decline of imperial unity. The late Middle Ages in the Holy Roman Empire marked a period of profound shifts in political dynamics and territorial fragmentation. The decline of central authority following the fall of the Hohenstaufen dynasty set the stage for significant changes in the structure of the empire. One of the most consequential developments during this time was the Golden Bull of 1356, issued by Charles IV, which formalized the process of electing the Holy Roman Emperor. The Golden Bull established a fixed college of 7 electors, whose role in choosing the emperor would be hereditary and more independent than before. This was a defining moment that shifted the focus from a unified imperial power to a more fragmented system of governance, where the emperor and the empire were no longer considered synonymous. The Golden Bull aimed to resolve the frequent contested royal elections by setting clear procedures, but it also had lasting consequences. It reinforced the power of local princes as it granted them greater control over their territories and made the electoral process more predictable. While the intention was to restore stability and peace to the empire, it also significantly undermined the emperor's authority. The power of the emperor became increasingly symbolic, with real political control resting more in the hands of local rulers. At the same time, Charles IV's reign marked a period of prosperity in Bohemia, his dynastic base, and the kingdom's golden age. However, challenges arose with the influx of German immigrants into Bohemia, creating tensions that would later erupt into religious conflicts and persecutions. Under his son Wenceslaus IV, the empire faced increased opposition, particularly from local baronial families, which weakened the central authority even further. The shifting power dynamics were also reflected in the way the kings sought to sustain their rule. The importance of the Reichsgut, imperial lands, diminished after the 13th century, as much of it was pawned off to local dukes to raise funds or reward loyalty. These fragmented lands were hard to govern effectively, leading to the increased reliance on the king's Hausmacht, family lands, for support. Rudolf I was the first to establish this practice, lending lands like Austria and Styria to his sons, and this approach became the norm for future emperors. By the end of the 14th century, the Holy Roman Empire had become a loose confederation of semi-autonomous territories, where the emperor's authority was more symbolic than executive. The electors, backed by their own territories, gained increasing independence, signaling the rise of territorial power within the empire. This decentralization would continue to shape the political landscape of the empire for centuries. The imperial reform in the Holy Roman Empire during the 15th century was a response to the increasingly fragmented and turbulent political landscape. By this time, the structure of the empire had become so complicated and unsettled that the old constitution no longer applied effectively, and feuds between local rulers were common. One notable social issue that emerged during this time was the rise of the robber barons, Roberter, who were noble figures involved in lawless activities like extortion and brigandage. This social instability, along with the church's internal crises, like the Great Schism and the Hussite Wars, highlighted the need for a comprehensive reform of the empire. As the 15th century progressed, the decline of the medieval vision of a unified Christian world, led by both the church and the empire, became more apparent. The Council of Constance, 1414 to 1418, aimed to resolve the papal disputes, and after 1419, the papacy's focus shifted to suppressing the Hussites, a religious movement that had challenged both the church and imperial authority. This period of turmoil prompted significant discussions about the need for reform at the imperial level. The idea of Landfrieden, imperial peace, became central again, with an emphasis on restoring stability to the empire through reinforced peace agreements. The Hussite Wars and the aftermath of the Council of Constance also played a role in this shift, as they demonstrated the power of local and regional entities in influencing the political landscape. Sigismund, who reigned from 1433 to 1437 and was king of the Romans from 1411, was one of the first to envision a dual reform of both the empire and the church. His ambition was to restore the empire's unity and strengthen its central authority, much like earlier monarchs had attempted. However, external challenges, internal political strife, and the extinction of the Luxembourg dynasty thwarted these efforts. His vision remained largely unfulfilled, and the effort to reform the empire was delayed. The reform process truly gained momentum under Frederick III, the first Habsburg emperor, who was crowned in 1452. Initially, Frederick was cautious about reform, as he viewed it as a potential threat to his imperial powers. He avoided direct confrontations with the princes, many of whom were pushing for reforms that would weaken imperial authority in favor of their own regional power. By the time of Frederick's later years, however, reform became more pressing, and the Archbishop of Mainz, Berthold von Henneberg, became a key figure in advocating for changes. He represented the princes who wanted reforms that wouldn't necessarily increase the emperor's power but would streamline governance and address the challenges of the empire's decentralization. When Frederick's son, Maximilian, came to power, he took a more active role in the reform process. While he also sought to preserve the imperial prerogatives, he was more open to mediation between the princes and the imperial authority. After Frederick retired in 1488, Maximilian effectively became the mediator between the two sides, balancing the needs of the princes with the centralizing ambitions of the imperial crown. His reign marked the early stages of what would later be known as the imperial reform, a process that aimed to consolidate imperial power and address the growing influence of local territorial rulers. Maximilian's approach to governance was more pragmatic. He understood that while centralizing the empire under imperial authority was important, it also required cooperation from the princes. By acting as a broker and mediator, Maximilian helped lay the groundwork for a new system in which the emperor had to work alongside the powerful territorial princes to maintain stability and order. The period of the Reformation and Renaissance marked a pivotal turning point in both the Holy Roman Empire and broader European history. The rise of Charles V and the challenges he faced in maintaining a unified empire amidst the growing religious divisions provide a fascinating narrative of power, politics, and religion. The rise of Charles V and the challenges of empire. In 1516, Ferdinand II of Aragon, the grandfather of Charles V, died. This event paved the way for Charles, who was already ruling as Carlos I of Spain, to assume a more prominent role on the European stage. By 1519, Charles took the imperial title as Karl V of the Holy Roman Empire. His inheritance included the crowns of Castile and Aragon, which formed the future Kingdom of Spain, as well as significant territories in the Low Countries, Burgundy, and parts of Italy. Despite his vast lands, the task of managing such a polycentric empire stretched Charles's capabilities, especially as political, religious, and military challenges arose. The Habsburg dynasty faced significant difficulties in maintaining its dominance, primarily due to the fragmentation of Europe into various competing states and religions. Additionally, Charles was unable to pass on the empire to his son Philip II of Spain due to both religious tensions and political opposition, notably from the German princes. Philip's inability to gain support was compounded by his awkward and withdrawn personality, coupled with his lack of fluency in the German language. This failure highlighted the challenges of managing a vast and diverse empire across different regions and cultures. The Reformation. The year 1517 saw the beginning of the Reformation, a movement led by Martin Luther that would deeply divide Germany and the Holy Roman Empire. Luther's criticisms of the Catholic Church sparked religious unrest and fractured the unity of the empire. The north, east, and many major cities like Strasbourg, Frankfurt, and Nuremberg embraced Protestantism, while the south and west largely remained faithful to Catholicism. This religious divide had profound political and social implications, with Protestantism becoming a rallying point for many in the empire. The struggles of imperial authority. At the beginning of Charles V's reign, he attempted to assert control over the empire by re-establishing the Reichsregiment in 1522, an imperial council meant to support governance in his absence. However, this body, much like its predecessor in the early 1500s, failed to create a centralized federal authority. The German princes were reluctant to relinquish their local power, and the Reichsregiment struggled with inconsistent participation and conflicting interests between the rulers. Charles's absence from Germany between 1521 and 1530 further weakened central control, as local rulers gained more autonomy. Despite his military success in the Schmalkaldic War 1547, where Charles defeated the Protestant princes, the momentum of Protestantism could not be fully contained. The Protestant estates survived politically, as the religious divide had already taken root in the fabric of the empire. Charles V's efforts to impose religious unity through military might were ultimately ineffective in resolving the broader issues of faith and governance. The Peace of Augsburg, 1555. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 was a critical turning point in the relationship between the Catholic Church and Protestantism within the Holy Roman Empire. Charles V, exhausted by years of religious conflict and political struggles, officially recognized the right of princes to determine the faith of their territories. This decision, brokered through Ferdinand, his brother and co-ruler of the empire, allowed rulers to choose between Catholicism and Lutheranism, but excluded Zwinglians, Calvinists, and other radical movements. This marked a formal acknowledgement of religious division in the empire, albeit with significant limitations on religious tolerance. The Peace of Augsburg temporarily alleviated religious tensions in the empire, but it also set the stage for continued religious and political conflicts in the centuries to come. The year 1555 also saw the election of Pope Paul IV, who took an anti-Habsburg stance and aligned with France. This strained relationship with the papacy, coupled with the exhaustion from religious wars and external challenges, such as the Ottomans, led to Charles V's eventual retreat from active imperial ambitions. He abdicated in 1556, splitting the Habsburg inheritance between his son, Philip II of Spain, and his brother, Ferdinand, who became the Holy Roman Emperor. Legacy and impact. The era of Charles V and the Reformation had far-reaching consequences for the Holy Roman Empire and Europe at large. The religious divisions created during this period continued to shape European politics, and the idea of a unified Christian empire under the papacy and emperor gradually faded. Charles V's abdication marked the end of an era, as the Habsburgs turned their focus towards Spain and its overseas empire, while the Holy Roman Empire continued to grapple with internal divisions, particularly between Catholics and Protestants. The Baroque period in the Holy Roman Empire. The Baroque period in the Holy Roman Empire was marked by a mixture of relative peace and persistent external and internal challenges. Though the empire saw a period of stability, especially in the aftermath of the 30 Years' War, it also faced mounting threats from outside and deep-seated tensions within. Peace and challenges. For much of the 17th century, the Holy Roman Empire experienced a semblance of peace, particularly after the turmoil of the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. The Eastern Front, however, remained a major concern, as the Ottoman Empire still posed a significant military threat. The Turkish presence in the East had long been a source of tension for the empire. However, military action against the Ottomans could have alienated the Protestant princes, so the emperors sought to avoid open conflict with the Turks. Meanwhile, in the West, the Rhineland increasingly fell under the influence of France, and after the Dutch revolt against Spain erupted, the empire, for the most part, remained neutral, effectively allowing the Netherlands to leave the empire in 1581. This period also saw the Cologne War 1583 to 1588, which ravaged much of the Upper Rhine, a result of tensions between Catholic and Protestant factions. Emperor Ferdinand III, r. 1637 to 1657, would formally recognize Dutch neutrality in 1653, a decision ratified by the Reichstag in 1728. This decision was part of the broader trend toward accepting Protestantism as a fact of life within the empire, a view held by emperors like Ferdinand and his successor Maximilian II. Maximilian II and Rudolf II. Maximilian II, reigned 1564 to 1576, succeeded Ferdinand I and continued his father's policy of compromise with the Protestant princes. Maximilian's reign saw the empire's internal tensions ease somewhat, but he was succeeded by his son, Rudolf II, in 1576. Rudolf's reign was marked by a personal retreat into Bohemia and an increasing reluctance to act decisively on matters of state. Rudolf had a particular interest in classical Greek philosophy rather than Christianity, and his lack of engagement with pressing political matters led to discontent, especially among the Protestant princes. Rudolf was especially reluctant to act when the Catholic Church began to assert control over Austria and Hungary, leading to uprisings from the Protestant factions. This growing weakness of imperial authority became clear by the time of Rudolf's death in 1612, setting the stage for the devastating conflicts to come. The 30 Years' War. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, remains one of the most catastrophic events in the history of the Holy Roman Empire. It began as a rebellion by the Bohemians against Emperor Ferdinand II, and quickly escalated into a war involving nearly all the European powers of the time. The conflict was deeply tied to religious tensions between Protestants and Catholics, but it was also a struggle for political power, as various foreign powers sought to assert their influence in the empire. Notably, France and Sweden intervened, strengthening the Protestant forces and even seizing considerable territory. By the end of the war, the Holy Roman Empire had been devastated. Voltaire famously quipped that the empire was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire, a reflection of the disillusionment with its ability to exert power and unity in the wake of the war. The Peace of Westphalia, 1648. The Peace of Westphalia, 1648, ended the 30 Years' War and had significant consequences for the empire. It allowed for the official recognition of Calvinism in addition to Lutheranism and Catholicism. However, Anabaptists, Arminians, and other smaller Protestant groups were still excluded from these protections and would continue to face persecution until the end of the empire. The Habsburg emperors, particularly Ferdinand III, focused on consolidating their own territories, primarily in Austria, as the empire's central authority continued to erode. The Battle of Vienna, 1683. One of the more notable military victories for the Holy Roman Empire during this period came in 1683 at the Battle of Vienna. The Ottoman Turks, led by Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, had laid siege to the city of Vienna in an attempt to push further into Europe. However, the Holy Roman Empire's forces, aided by the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth under King John III Sobieski, decisively defeated the Turkish army, halting the Ottoman advance into Central Europe. This victory marked a turning point in the Ottoman Empire's presence in Europe, leading to its eventual disintegration in the centuries that followed. The legacy of the Baroque period. The Baroque period in the Holy Roman Empire was characterized by a delicate balance between Catholicism and Protestantism, with the Habsburgs struggling to maintain their imperial authority amidst religious strife and external threats. The 30 Years' War left the empire deeply fractured, while the Battle of Vienna offered a rare moment of military triumph. Although the empire would continue for another 2 centuries, it was clear by the end of the 17th century that its central authority had been irreparably weakened. The modern period, Prussia, Austria, and the fall of the Holy Roman Empire. The modern period of the Holy Roman Empire was characterized by significant conflicts and transformations, notably between Austria and Prussia, as well as external pressures from the French Revolution and Napoleon. The dissolution of the empire marked the end of an era that had lasted for over a millennium. Prussia and Austria. The rise of German dualism. During the 18th century, Prussia and Austria became the 2 dominant powers within the empire. The Habsburgs had long relied on their hereditary lands, especially Austria, to maintain their power, but this was increasingly challenged by the rise of Prussia, a burgeoning military power under the leadership of figures such as Frederick the Great. This German dualism, the rivalry between Austria and Prussia, became the defining feature of the empire's internal politics. Prussia, although a smaller state geographically, was known for its military efficiency and reforms, and it often sought to expand its influence within the empire. Austria, under the Habsburgs, retained a more traditional and influential role in both the empire and European diplomacy. Throughout the 18th century, the Habsburgs were embroiled in several European conflicts that further entrenched this rivalry. War of the Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714. War of the Polish Succession, 1733 to 1735. War of the Austrian Succession, 1740 to 1748, during which Prussia seized the region of Silesia from Austria, further escalating tensions between the 2 powers. The French Revolutionary Wars and the fall of the empire. From 1792, Revolutionary France, led by Napoleon Bonaparte, waged war against various European powers, including parts of the Holy Roman Empire. The rise of Napoleon fundamentally altered the political landscape of Europe. The German mediatization and secularization processes, which occurred between 1795 and 1814, were key consequences of the upheaval caused by Napoleon's conquests. Mediatization. This was the process by which smaller imperial estates were annexed by larger territorial states, often stripping the smaller estates of much of their power and autonomy. The imperial knights were among the most significant estates to be affected, with their territories absorbed by larger states. Secularization. This involved the confiscation of land and power from religious rulers such as bishops and abbots, with the annexed territories being absorbed into secular states. The Catholic Church's political influence within the empire was significantly reduced as a result. These processes paved the way for Napoleon to reorganize much of the empire into the Confederation of the Rhine, 1806, a French satellite state. This marked the formal dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire on August 6, 1806, when Emperor Francis II, who had become Emperor Francis I of Austria in 1804, abdicated the imperial throne following a decisive French victory at the Battle of Austerlitz, 1805. Napoleon's reorganization of the German-speaking lands and the subsequent end of the Holy Roman Empire were a direct consequence of his military dominance and the political instability caused by the French Revolution. The end of the Holy Roman Empire and aftermath. Francis II's abdication signaled the end of the Holy Roman Empire, which had lasted for over 1,000 years. Although the House of Habsburg-Lorraine survived the empire's collapse, continuing to rule as emperors of Austria and kings of Hungary, the political structure of the German-speaking world was forever altered. In the aftermath of Napoleon's defeat in 1815, the German Confederation was established at the Congress of Vienna. It was a loose association of 39 German-speaking states, created to replace the Confederation of the Rhine. This confederation lasted until 1866, when Prussia defeated Austria in the Austro-Prussian War and founded the North German Confederation. This paved the way for the creation of a unified German Empire in 1871, with Prussia at its helm. The legacy of the Holy Roman Empire. Although the Holy Roman Empire was formally dissolved in 1806, its legacy continued to influence European politics for many years. After the dissolution, only a few member states retained their monarchical status. The Grand Duchy of Luxembourg and the Principality of Liechtenstein are the only princely states that remain monarchies today. The free imperial cities of Hamburg and Bremen are the only remaining entities within Germany that retain the status of imperial cities. The legacy of the Habsburg Empire continued as well, as the Austrian Empire remained a Central European power until its final dissolution after World War I in 1918. Conclusion: the transition to modern Germany. By the mid-19th century, the German Confederation was replaced by the North German Confederation after the Austro-Prussian War, which led to the unification of Germany under Prussian leadership in 1871. This marked the end of the fragmented political structure that had characterized the Holy Roman Empire and the rise of a unified German Empire, which laid the foundation for the modern state of Germany as we know it today. The Holy Roman Empire may have vanished in 1806, but its legacy lives on in modern Germany and the EU. Which other lost kingdoms should we explore next? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey through medieval politics, help us share more. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more from History Love.